There comes a point in every audio hobby's life when they look at yet another brand new budget release, they squint at the marketing and think, no, I refuse to pretend this changes my life. Because that is where we are now. Every other week, some new sub-$50 earphone arrives claiming that it has divine tuning, revolutionary performance, and enough emotional impact to repair your relationship with music, your finances, your fiancé, and possibly your posture. And after a while, the whole thing starts to feel less like discovery and more like wandering through a crowded discount aisle under bad fluorescent lighting. And so, if you have reached that point, if you are tired, mildly annoyed, and ready to move past the entry-level chaos, then congratulations, you have made it out of the swamp. Today, we are talking about some of the best earphones from the $200 to $500 price range. This is the range where things start getting serious. Not sell a kidney serious, but serious enough that companies can stop throwing random parts into a shell and calling it innovation. And thankfully, some of these are actually good. Very good, in fact. So here are my top picks from the $200 to $500 price range. 3 earphones that stand out for very different reasons, and all of them worth your attention if you have finally decided to leave the bargain bin behind. Let's start with the Dunu DN242, which is an earphone that looks at moderation, laughs softly, and proceeds to do absolutely everything. The thing comes packed with 8 drivers per side. You get a 10mm dynamic driver for sub-bass, a 8mm dynamic driver for bass, 2 custom mid-range balance armatures, 2 more balance armatures for treble, and then 2 micro planers on top of that. It is in every sense an ambitious piece of work. Now, when I usually see a driver count like this, I assume someone in a meeting just keeps saying more until everybody else stops resisting. But the DN242 does not sound like a bad idea that survived corporate approval. It sounds focused, intentional, like someone actually knew what they wanted to do. Visually, it also leans into a very stylized, almost anime-inspired aesthetic. I'm not emotionally prepared to unpack what that says about me or why I instinctively feel ancient when looking at it, but I will say, this is striking. The shell is 3D printed by Hagears and the overall build feels polished. The faceplate is the part I really enjoy. There's a glossy red base with gold and white haze layered over it, and it creates this almost floating dimensional effect. The rest of the shell is glossy black, which keeps the whole design from becoming too loud. Somehow it all works. Against reason perhaps, but it works. Now the sound. The DN242 has a vocal forward presentation, and that is really the heart of its appeal. This is the kind of tuning that makes voices feel substantial, not just present, not just clear, but full. There is weight to them. A sense that the singer is actually carrying emotion instead of just passing through the mix like a mildly apologetic ghost. The overall tuning lands in a tasteful V shape, and I say tasteful because this is not one of those exaggerated tunings where the bass and treble are just doing theatrical stunts while the mid-range files a complaint in the background. It sounds balanced, natural, and well judged for the price. Based on the DN242 is punchy and dynamic. It has that satisfying sense of impact without becoming bloated, and there's a nice explosiveness to the way notes hit. It gives music some physicality which matters. Good bass should feel like conviction, not just quantity. The mid-range is where this earphone really earns its place here. It sounds true to life and the note weight is excellent. Male vocals sound rich, female vocals sound sweet and refined, and the balance is harder to get right than it should be. A lot of earphones pick a side and leave the other one out in the rain. The DN242 doesn't. It handles both beautifully. Treble is also impressive, extension is strong, and there's a real sense of air and openness here. The balance armatures and microplaners work together in a way that gives the top end a spacious, effortless quality. It never feels shut in. For me, the DN242's defining feature is simple. Vocals. There's a sweetness in the way it renders voices that feels rare in this price range. If you care about singers sounding human, and ideally sounding like they have slept at least once in the last week, this one gets it very right. Next, we have the 7Hz Timeless 2, which is not exactly the newest thing anymore, and honestly, this is part of its charm. So there is something actually very deeply satisfying about finding an older release that still holds up, especially in a hobby that behaves like everything from 6 months ago belongs in a museum. The Timeless 2 is one of those reminders that newer does not automatically mean better. Sometimes it just means newer, which is less exciting, I know, but also more honest. And the Timeless 2 is still very, very good. The faceplate has this 3D pyramid texture that catches light beautifully and changes depending on the angle. It is subtle enough to feel deliberate, but interesting enough that you notice it every time you pick it up. The rest of the shell is black anodized aluminum, and the overall design feels like an evolution of the original rather than a dramatic reinvention. Inside, it uses a planar driver, and more importantly, it sounds like a mature implementation of one. Earlier planar magnetic earphones often had that slightly metallic upper mid character, the hard shiny edge that made certain vocals feel less emotional and more like they were being read by a rather efficient appliance. The Timeless 2 largely avoids that. It has a U-shaped tuning, and what stands out most to me is the sense of space. This earphone creates soundstage in a way that feels believable, not artificially stretched, not distantly weird, but open and realistic. Instruments have room to breathe, and that alone makes long listening sessions much better. Bass here has that classic planar behavior, fast, controlled and precise. There's a clear focus on sub-bass, and it transitions cleanly into the mid-bass without becoming muddy. The dynamics are tight and the attack is surprisingly satisfying. Kick drums land with firmness, there is no flap, no haste, no sense that the bass is hanging around after it has made its point. Resolution in the low end is excellent too. You can hear the structure of bass notes clearly, and because it stays disciplined, it never clouds the mid-range. And that mid-range benefits from all of this. It has a natural tonal weight with just a hint of warmth, which makes it easy to listen to. The technical cleanliness of the bass leaves plenty room for the mids to open up, so instruments and vocals come through with strong separation and a nice three-dimensional feel. Nothing actually feels congested. Vocals are especially well judged. Male and female vocals both handled evenly. Neither feels favoured at the expense of the other. The balance gives the Timeless 2 a broad appeal because it works across a lot of genres without forcing its personality too hard onto the music. Treble is another strength. Extension is fantastic, and it manages that difficult trick of being smooth while still carrying energy. It feels airy, effortless and refined. It does not jab at you for attention. It just quietly does a very competent job, which is more than I can say for most people with several products. So if you have been looking for a planar earphone and wondering whether you need the latest thing with the newest hype cycle attached to it, the answer is no. The Timeless is still very relevant, still very competitive, and these days often available at a much better price. Which is, in this economy of endless disappointment, this is almost romantic. And lastly, we have the Binary Acoustics EP321. Now for the Binary Acoustics EP321, which is probably the most interesting of the three, if treble performance is what you care about the most. This uses a 10mm dynamic driver, a 6mm passive radiator, 3 balance armatures, and a MEMS driver. And yes, that is a mildly absurd sentence, but unlike some other mildly absurd sentences in this hobby, it actually leads somewhere worthwhile. Build-wise, the EP321 has a mostly clear shell that lets you see the inside, and it reminds me of older transparent electronics. Back when companies let you admire the internals like you were peeking behind the curtain of some tiny mechanical civilization. The shell feels solid, sturdy and well assembled. It gives off that reassuring impression that it can survive real use, which is helpful when life insists on being clumsy. The tuning is another V-shape, but the way it is executed matters. There's a slight emphasis in the upper mids, just enough to add some bite and presence without tipping over into harshness. The result is a versatile tuning that works across many genres. With a ton of drivers, what really impressed me here is the coherence. Hybrid earphones can sometimes feel like several different ideas forced into the same room, all speaking over each other. The EP321 does not have that problem. For me, this is one of the most coherent hybrid sets I've heard in 2026. Everything connects smoothly from top to bottom. Bass is handled by the 10mm dynamic driver with help from the passive radiator, and while that combination might suggest overwhelming bass quantity, that is not actually what you get. Instead, you get control, texture, and a well-managed sense of resonance. Sub-bass has priority over mid-bass, which gives it a cleaner, more modern low-end profile. It digs deep, stays quick, and avoids mudding the rest of the sound. The mid-range is rendered through balanced armatures, and it comes across clean, transparent, and highly detailed. This is a more technical presentation than the earlier mentioned Dunu DN242, less lush and less romantic, but very articulate. Notes are sharply defined and small details come through quite easily. Then we get to the treble, which is where the EP321 sets itself apart. The MEMS driver gives it a top end that sounds fast, clean, and remarkably effortless. There's a real sense of air here, along with impressive space and depth. Treble has extension, but more importantly, it also has grace. It does not feel forced, it does not sound brittle, it just opens up the presentation and lets everything breathe. And that is my favorite part of the EP321, the ease of it. Treble is smooth, refined, and airy in a way that makes the whole listening experience feel more spacious and expansive. It is the kind of implementation that actually justifies the driver choice instead of just using it as a marketing gimmick. Binary integrated the MEMS driver in a way that feels meaningful, and that deserves credit. So those are my top picks from $200 to $500, the Dunu DN242, the 7Hz Timeless 2, and the Binary Acoustics EP321. Each one does something distinctly well. The DN242 is the one that I would reach for if vocals matter most to you. Rich, sweet, and beautifully weighted. The Timeless 2 is still one of the most satisfying planar options in the range, with strong space, clean bass, and a mature tuning that has aged much better than most internet opinions. And lastly, the Binary Acoustic EP321 is the one for people who want that airy, effortless treble presentation without sacrificing coherence everywhere else. Honestly, this whole price range is where things start to get interesting. You move beyond the endless budget noise, beyond the promises, and beyond the tiny cardboard boxes full of exaggerated claims and moderate regrets. You start finding products that feel properly thought through, which is really nice. Anyway, let me know which one you'd pick, or if there's one other favorite in this range that deserves to be in this conversation. If you've enjoyed this video, you can like and subscribe. If not, well, that is fine too. I guess we all cope in different ways. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you guys soon.